Reason number one to know exactly how to decode the Italian diction in a piece we're singing is that if we cannot do that, we cannot fully claim to be able to read music altogether, because that music was written to portray the diction of the language. At a time, recordings did not exist, in my opinion, in order to preserve it, since Italian diction, magic diction, so beautiful to hear, so precious, so easy to sing, has a very mysterious origin and way of transmission. Written music, written Western music, was born on the Gregorian Latin, portrayed by the hand gesture of the choir master that explained to the choir how to sing a melody, and in order for that melody to be remembered was just noted down as drawings of that hand gesture that gave the accenti, the accent, ad cantum that favors the singing. Not by chance in operatic Italian, in ancient Italian, the word accento stands for word, for parola. And it's also very interesting to note that parola comes from parabola. So it's actually a trajectory, something that has a movement, an inner jump inside that can deliver a concept and that can create a movement if correctly spelled like a spell or not. Benedizione, maledizione. As much as we nowadays with the stage directing favor the plot, the libretto of an opera is not really about the plot. The stories are quite sloppy most of the times. It's about patterns, drawings that then the voice and the instruments go color. Like the stones of a cathedral, they create a structure, and that structure has to be exact, because if it is exact, we will see the drawing and our ear will be able to remember what has just heard and prevent what's to come more easily in that guessing that is listening to music. We know that music is all about remembering something we just heard and envisioning what will come on the basis of what we just heard, because in music we can only listen to the present moment in time. Everything else has either already happened or has yet to come. Music is actually something we only carry in our heads by listening only to the present moment, reconstructing and envisioning, pre-visioning, guessing somehow. A libretto is a clockwork. It's a drawing, it's a pattern, a beautiful toy that our voice can play with in the easiest possible way. When that happens, singing is easy, both to do and to listen to. If that pattern is clear, we will favor a better fruition of music, and everybody's happy. The reason why the Italian vocabulary stayed in Western music theory is because Italian is a perfectly binary, black and white, contrasted language. Italia, narrow, open, narrow, open. The name says it for itself. The narrowest, the widest. Italian is like that. In Italian, what is not open is by default closed. What is not tonic and strong is by default atonal, without sound, and weak. There always has to be chiaro, scuro, piano, forte. In a treaty that he wrote in Latin, Dante claims that the Italian language, his very creation, which he extracted from the many Italian speeches by selecting what was more euphonic, was illustrious, and he specifies what he means by illustrious. Illustrious means that if you shine light on it, it shines bright. So If we don't have the correct vowel position, if we don't have the correct vowels, if our vowels are somehow affected by the pronunciation processes of other languages, they cannot be those perfect prisms, those perfect crystal shapes where the voice can perfectly reverberate of a very regular, shiny reverberation, the way it does when the Italian language is correct. Italian vowels have an exact shape that makes the language illustrious, because if the reverberation is correct, the vibrato is correct, and it will favor the legato, which is the shine that melts together to separate sounds, just like the stars in the Milky Way. The only rule we should know about Italian diction is that a vowel can be open only if it's strong. And if it's not strong, it cannot be open and it must be closed. For the same reason, it's really important to know how to deal with consonants and give them the correct articulation. And sometimes that correct articulation is not immediate to detect, even to an Italian ear. If a vowel is spelled doubled, or if there is a mandatory doubling, a syntactic germination, then it really has to be doubled. And the composer will always know where to place it in order to favor the singing and to better draw the pattern of the phrasing he wants to render. But if a consonant is plain, it has to slip away as smoothly as possible in order not to break the legato. If we tend to strengthen consonants without noticing and without knowing, that are not supposed to be strengthened. That's what happens. They can be bumps in the roads of the vocal line that will cut the overtones for a split second to your ear, as if someone just blindfolds you for a second when you're driving and the car goes. That can mean a lot in the economy of a phrase, of an aria, of an entire opera. Fixing those bumps will let a good 90% of the vocal trouble you are encountering in singing a piece melt away. It's all about reading the signs. Good interpreters of music are the ones who can correctly read the signs, interpret the signs that the composer used to transmit an idea. We need to be able to correctly read the signs. And personally, as a coach, composer, as a composition graduate, and so on, I find in my students very often that the main vocal problem that they have is that they are not correctly reading and interpreting the signs of the score. Helping them with diction is also helping them to become more familiar with the work of the composer. This staccato has a meaning because you would say it like this. That legato, that portamento do have a meaning too, because in the speech we would say this like this or like that. Whenever I coach a singer on an aria or an entire role, I always provide a recording of my voice enunciating the diction and explaining the rules I am giving, rules that are mentioned in detail in my book Cantare Italiano, because those recordings are used to let the words sink in, let the prosody sink in, let the phrasing of the aria sink in, and it helps a great deal with the memorization of a role before it goes on stage. They are important because they are part of a method. They don't stand by themselves, because even if you think that you're listening to something and repeating it identical, most of the times it's not so. It's a method that I have developed and tested in over 10 years of work. In my recordings, you will hear that I pronounce in a very peculiar way. I voluntarily smooth on the verge of speaking with a lisp the plain vowels, and I excessively double the double ones. It's really important in order to mold the prosody in the ear of a singer, because it's important to render the contrasts. They will make the audience feel like they can understand Italian and speak Italian, even if they don't. And no one cares if you don't get the exact meaning of the words, because singing an opera is not about that. It's about something more subliminal, something more structural that has to pop out when you're singing. Join the ARKive, explore it, listen to as many roles as you can. Get your ear adjusted to the Italian prosody. I want to take the operatic professional world to a point where if you don't do this type of work, you are not being professional, and what you're doing is not really Italian opera and not acceptable. Help me preserve the language of opera. Join the ARKive. Have sessions with me. I want to transmit what I'm learning. I want to train new coaches with my method and at my level. Read the book. Dive into this work with me. It's totally worth it. It's going to change so many things in the opera world. It's something that really has to be preserved. The whole music writing was born in order to preserve the beauty of Italian diction. When Dante wrote the Divine Comedy, he somehow had an out-of-body experience and he heard the language spoken. I believe that Dante somehow wants to claim that if a heaven exists, the national language is Italian. This is how to use the recordings. You first write down by hand the lyrics of the piece you're singing, the aria, the recit, whatever, on a blank piece of paper. Just the lyrics on a piece of paper. You play the recording, and on that piece of paper, you will only mark two things: open vowels, doublings. Open vowels, doublings. If I don't mark a vowel, an E or an O, open, it means that it's closed. So you will only see the marks of the open vowel, and you will have less marks on your score. It will be easier to remember where you have to open. And whenever you have to open an E or an O, instead of putting an IPA symbol on top of it, you will put a small vowel A, an A, on top of it. So you will remember that the open E and that the open O are derived from the A, and whenever you have to open an E or an O, your body will have to open up, your throat will have to open up as with your most comfortable A. A, O. Same placement, as if the E was a lighter A and the O was somewhat of a heavier A, but they are two variants of the vowel A. So first thing you mark are the open vowels by putting a small A on top of any E and O that I mark. Open. Second thing to mark are the mandatory doublings. I'm not speaking about the spelled double consonants. Those are doubled, are to be pronounced double at all times, even if a word like affetto has a couple of double consonants, you have to pronounce all of them. I'm speaking about the syntactic termination, okay? The ones that are not written, that are just in the speech, like a casa, davvero, davvero. So, you mark the open vowels that I mark open in my reading. You mark the doublings that I mark double in my reading. Only these two things. What is not opened is closed. What is not doubled is plain. And even if you have a doubt, if you have the temptation and you want to open a vowel that I didn't mark open, you know you can't. If you want to double an initial consonant that I did not mark open, you know you can't. And you get adjusted to the right way and you start singing so easily you can hardly believe it. A lot of old pieces that you have dismissed because they are hard to sing will all of a sudden look, sound, and feel so new, so easy, so making sense. I assure you, you have to try this. Join the ARKive only to do this type of work, only to hear how different Italian opera may sound if you sing it correctly, and how a structural part of the vocal technique and of the musical writing diction is. It's the origin of everything. Opera would not exist if the Italian diction wasn't so perfect, binary, simple, synthetic. This ARKive is ever expanding. In the plans, you will have the chance to ask for new roles and to work on them with me. You will have a great benefit, and the whole Cantare Italiano community will benefit of this. It's very important that you do. Join and support my work and support Italian opera. It's important that we preserve it the way it was meant by the genius poets and composers that gave birth to eternal masterpieces. We're not Italians and non-Italians. We are all part of the state of opera.